Welcome, everyone. So today we're going to talk about the Doctrine of Signatures, which is an ancient way of understanding plant medicine through observation and intuition. Excited to talk to you about this topic. For thousands of years, humans have looked to nature to provide healing for a multitude of different ailments, but how did our ancestors know which plants to pick? They didn't have Google to look it up. Hopefully after today you'll know the answer to that question. Plants carry what are called signatures, which is form, color, shape, taste, and other attributes that actually indicate their healing abilities. For example, walnut represents the human brain with its skull-like shell and inner folds that represent the hemispheres of the brain. And now we know that it actually strengthens cognition because of its high levels of omega-3 fatty acids. But this is a perfect example of the Doctrine of Signatures. So the Doctrine of Signatures is largely a medicinal doctrine that teaches us to look for a sign in a plant that describes its beneficial properties. The signature represents an organ or a pattern of health or disease. I've selected plants that you might be familiar with, mainly because I want you to play with this. So you might notice or be familiar with some of the plants I talk about, and you might go and look and find them in your backyard or in the wilds around us or in your garden. Modern herbalism relies on chemical constituents, and I'll talk a little bit about that tonight. But the Doctrine of Signatures gives a much more comprehensive view of an herb's effects. And while biomedicine has become the standard in the 21st century, the Doctrine of Signatures was the standard for ancient Western tradition as well as other ancient healing modalities like Chinese medicine, African herbalism, and Indian Ayurveda. Tonight we'll talk about the two ways of intuitively connecting with plants. One is through deep observation, where we use all of our senses to tune into shape, color, scent, smell, taste. And the other is through intuition. Indigenous cultures call this the dream time, where plants actually indicate directly to us a pattern or color or a vision about their healing ability. The important thing is that the rational mind provides a cause and effect, explanation, but intuition provides the big picture behind that. So intuition is a felt sense in the body that then informs the mind. So a well-trained mind and well-trained senses provide the total picture of what's going on. And I often use this in my practice with clients when I'm hearing what they're saying about the symptoms they're presenting with, and I might look at lab results, so I'm getting a rational perspective, but then I'm also like stepping back and getting an intuitive sense of what's happening in their body and what the interconnected patterns might be and how a plant might actually benefit them. So the Doctrine of Signatures becomes a confirmation of something I'm already sensing that might be helpful for them. So the intuitive approach actually brings the pieces together into a meaningful whole. So what we'll cover tonight are, beginning with the history. We've talked about foundations, and we're going to talk about history. Throughout history, cultures across the world have worked with this way of knowing. But very few books, interestingly, have been written about the Doctrine of Signatures, with just a few references that I'll refer to tonight. The original herbalists were prehistoric humans. I mean, even dating back 60,000 years ago, humans were using plants for medicine, and it was most likely the women that were the gatherers and treated the sick in their clans. So really, the history of herbalism is the history of women, because it's been women through time that have been the healers. However, tonight you'll see a more patriarchal view of this. But also, just adding on to women as healers. In ancient Egypt and Greece, it was the female priestesses and physicians that had significant roles in culture. And then in the Middle Ages, medical schools began forming and excluded women. And that is a lecture for another evening. But in colonial America, women healers formed collectives. So indigenous healers, African healers, and European healers formed collectives and networks of healing and served together as doctors, nurses, midwives, and apothecaries. So women, there's a rich, rich texture, and I do look forward to teaching that topic at some point. But the history of the doctrine of signatures begins really, the documented history of the doctrine of signatures begins in ancient Hellenistic Egypt in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. The philosophy begins as a Hermetic philosophy. I don't know if you've heard of Hermeticism, but it blends Greek and Egyptian traditions together and is the root of philosophies like alchemy, astrology, theurgy, and self-purification. All of these date back to Hermeticism. The belief was that universal forces could be understood and utilized to achieve harmony within the body and with the universe. You might have heard the quote, "as above, so below." That is from the Hermetic Emerald Tablet and teaches us that the microcosm of the human body represents the macrocosm of the universe. And we'll see this tonight in a few different examples, and it's important as a foundational philosophy to the doctrine of signatures. So what you'll see just now is the important work of the documented contributors to the doctrine of signatures. A lot of white guys. So the history we're going to explore today is based on the patriarchal model of the 15th to the 20th century, mainly because these were the individuals who documented the doctrine of signatures. We don't have documented history of indigenous healers and women healers because, well, they were oral traditions that were passed down. Yeah, they were oral traditions. But we begin in ancient Rome. So the major written works here, and I'll mention a few minor ones as well, but the major written works begin in ancient Rome. The foundational work for the doctrine of signatures began with Dioscorides in the 1st century, and he wrote a book called De Materia Medica, which was a systematic list of 600 plants. He didn't explicitly outline the doctrine of signatures, but he did explain patterns of form and their connection to disease. For example, he talked about plants that looked like a snake being healing for snake bites. And then there was Pliny the Elder as well, who wrote a book called Naturalis Historia in the 1st century, and talked about plants in folk tradition. For example, he talked about milky sap of plants being effective for lactation. Later authors interpreted these works, Dioscorides and Pliny the Elder, in their works on the doctrine of signatures. Between Rome and the Renaissance, the doctrine of signatures didn't vanish, but it lived on in illustrations in monastic herbals and Islamic texts and symbolic theology. It wasn't articulated as a formal written doctrine until the Renaissance, when Hermeticism, alchemy, and printing converged. Paracelsus is really the founder of the doctrine of signatures. He was the first major documented contributor. He was a Swiss doctor, a surgeon, and built his philosophies on Hermetic theory. He believed that divine intelligence imprinted clues into each plant. And you'll see this as a common thread. He also developed other essential themes in addition to the doctrine of signatures. He developed the doctrine of similars, or the law of similars, that like treats like. He also developed the theory of the vital life force, that every living organism has a unique and individual energy. He also developed the doctrine of correspondence, that everything in the physical world represents the divine. And he expounded on the idea of the microcosm and the macrocosm. And one of the examples he uses is that the veins in the human body represent the rivers on the planet. So as above, so below. Paracelsus taught that healing resulted from linking the cure in the macrocosm to the diseased organ in the microcosm. That disease is a disturbance in the harmony caused by a disruption of the natural balance of universal forces in the individual. I'm going to say that again. That disease is a disturbance in the harmony caused by a disruption of the natural balance of universal forces in the individual. Isn't that interesting? And when you think about Chinese medicine and how Chinese medicine works with qi, it's very much aligned with that. So this is where a lot of our common current holistic medicines date back to Paracelsus. He didn't publish a single book exclusively on the Doctrine of Signatures, although his work De Rerum Natura, which is Latin for of the nature of things, prominently developed the theory, and then the doctrine was explored in his other writings, his philosophical, alchemical, and medical papers. There's a minor figure between or after Paracelsus, Giambattista della Porta, who wrote a book called Phytonomonica in 1588, which helped spread the idea of the Doctrine of Signatures. And another minor figure, Oswald Kroll, a German physician and alchemist, was a disciple of Paracelsus, and he wrote a book called Basilica Chymica, which spread Paracelsian medicine. And then now we have Jacob Boehme in the 16th century. He was a German mystic, a disciple of Paracelsus, and he coined the term in his book, The Signature of All Things. I have a rare copy. This book was written in 1588.
It's in great shape.
Isn't it? He believed that God left imprints on herbs, animals, even stones, indicating their healing abilities. So here we have Christianity coming in with God imprinting symbols. Nicholas Culpeper, who a lot of herbalists refer back to, worked out, according to the doctrine of correspondence that Paracelsus developed, he developed a planetary correspondence, that every plant had a planetary correspondence. And he wrote about that in his books, The English Physician and the Complete Herbal, in 1652 and 1653. Incidentally, though, Culpeper also provided free medical services to anyone that needed it throughout his career. So, thank you, Culpeper. Now enter William Coles. In 1657, he wrote a book called Adam in Eden. And this was the first English book on the Doctrine of Signatures. It matched plants to the human body part by part. So it's probably our best reference book in terms of signatures. Like Boehme, he also believed that God marked plants with signatures. He was the one that claimed that walnut was good for cognition. And he also was the one, which I'll talk about later, that indicated that St. John's wort, because of its tiny oil glands, indicated that it was healing for the plants, because those little holes represented the pores in our skin. And I'll talk about that just in a bit later. So William Coles, huge contributor to the Doctrine of Signatures. And now we have a 300-year gap in history. After Coles, the Doctrine of Signatures lost credibility with the rise of the scientific method, taxonomy, and chemical medicine. It survived in folk practice and began resurfacing in the early 19th century. And how it resurfaced, the revival of it, began with Goethe. I don't know if you know Goethe, the poet. He wrote about the intuitive approach to science. And then Rudolf Steiner in the 1890s talked about the intuitive approach to spiritual growth. But in 1960s and 1970s, with the Back to the Land and herbal revival, the Doctrine of Signatures had a huge resurgence. So here's where you enter modern herbalism. And a lot of the folk herbalists, community herbalists that began using the Doctrine of Signatures dating back to the 60s and 70s. Ben Charles Harris wrote a book called The Complete Herbal. And I don't have a picture of him because his family, I think when he passed away a few decades ago, his family completely must have scrubbed him from the internet. So you cannot find a picture of him anywhere. So I don't have Ben Charles Harris here, but we will honor him with his book, written in 1972, The Complete Herbal, in which he mentions every single medicinal plant and the signature of each one. So this is a really valuable.
What's the book called?
It's called The Complete Herbal.
Ben Charles Harris.
Ben Charles Harris. He was a pharmacist and a woodsman that lived in Worcester, Massachusetts. So he's not only a pharmacist who knew chemical constituents and medicine, but then he was also a woodsman, so he knew the plants and communed with them. I'm going to quote from Ben Charles Harris. If we believe in a life force, then we must consider options beyond objective reality. Denying the existence of an energetic component to healing limits the spectrum of what is possible. Thank you. He recommends that the first signature one look at is the habitat of an herb. So that's where we're going to begin. So now we're going to talk about how to recognize signatures using our 5 senses. First, our sense of sight. The habitat, which is where a plant grows, is a signature. So the environment is a signature because it reflects the conditions that a plant has had to adapt to, and that corresponds with the conditions for which it is beneficial. For example, wet environments indicate a plant's ability to heal the lymphatic and kidney systems, which handle wetness in the body and moisture balance. For example, conditions related to mucus or swollen glands or urinary issues or fever or rheumatic conditions. For example, willow thrives in damp, watery soils, and I'm sure that you've seen it along Bear Creek. I recently did a rafting trip on the newly reborn Klamath, and oh my gosh, it was amazing. It was incredible to hear about the Shasta Indians owning land for the first time in over 100 years. But the Shasta Indians reseeded all the banks of the river, and they reseeded willow along the banks of the river because they know, willow is a part that holds the bank together. But it also does that for the human body. So when you think about rheumatism or joint pain or conditions that are often worsened by dampness, willow is excellent for this. In 1838, it was found that the inner bark of willow contained salicylic acid, and that became the basis for modern aspirin. So when you think about plants that grow in damp, watery conditions are good for damp, watery conditions in us. So like gout, urinary issues, water retention, but also mucus, just a lot of, the wetness and congestion. Yeah, I think that's probably good on that. Another wet plant, horsetail. You've probably seen this along Clay Creek when you've hiked up through the Orson Todd, because it grows in abundance along Clay Creek. Horsetail is found on the banks of ponds and streams and is indicated, no surprise, as a diuretic for the urinary system. It also looks like hair, as you can see, and is rich in silica, which is strengthening to connective tissue like nails and hair and skin. What's interesting too is that plants that grow in gravelly soil, and you'll see this with horsetail and you'll also see this with parsley root or pipsissewa, is that those are good, not only are there wet conditions, so good for urinary tract, but the gravelly soil is an indication that they're good for kidney stones. I know, isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that it looks like hair and it is good for the hair. Also, plants growing in open sunlight are good for warming and cheering. Think about plants that love sunlight, like St. John's wort or calendula or lemon balm. are mood elevators and lifting for the spirit. So again, the habitat being an indication of what the plant's benefits are. And now we'll start looking at color. Hawthorn berries. I just harvested hawthorn berries near North Mountain Park. You know, there's hundreds of hawthorn trees along North Mountain Park. Yeah, they're just in abundance. But color gives strong clues to a plant's action. This can be the color of a plant's flower, or in this case the fruit, but also the root, the stem, and the sap. Red, as you can imagine, connects to the blood and the heart, and hawthorn is the perfect example. It increases blood circulation to the heart, increases oxygen flow to the heart, and strengthens the heart muscle and strengthens contractions. So red is the perfect example of blood and heart. Cayenne is another example, being a red fruit, and it moves blood and circulation through the body. Red clover also has long been established as a blood purifier. Red rose petals are good for circulation, all red. Purple flowers have also been considered blood purifiers, like burdock root, for example, has a purple flower, wild indigo and poke root as well. Burgundy red is an indicator of blood builders. So again, it's that richer red, and it indicates that it builds the blood. Romania is a good example of that, or sumac berry. Blue is one of the most reliable color signatures and indicates antispasmodics. Blue vervain, lobelia, skullcap, blue cohosh, wood betony, lavender. These are all herbs with blue flowers that indicate their benefit for muscle spasms and cramps related to nervous tension. So when you think about like how your neck gets tight, your shoulders get like this, and your neck gets tight, that's where these antispasmodics are especially helpful. They work as nervines, calming the nervous system, but they also work to relax muscles. If there's anything else I wanted to say about that. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Christopher's formulas, any of you that are into old-time herbalists, but Dr. Christopher had an antispasmodic remedy that was blue vervain, lobelia, skullcap, and blue cohosh. So he put those three together based on the Doctrine of Signatures. Our state flower. Did you know that Oregon grape is our state flower? Mm-hmm. So orange and yellow are a color indication for, can you imagine? Bile.
Organ and bile.
So the yellow indicates usefulness for the liver and gallbladder. And these examples of this are dandelion, gentian, yellow dock, celandine, fringe tree, golden seal, barberry. Oregon grape is a perfect example, and look how the flowers and the root are both yellow. So yellow stimulates bile flow, and that is especially useful if someone has gallbladder stagnation. So just countless clients who have dealt with gallbladder pain. I don't know if you or anybody you know has had gallbladder pain, but any of these yellow indicator herbs are so good for thinning out the bile and increasing the production of bile in the gallbladder so that it moves through the common bile duct and into the liver and keeps bile thin and flowing. So helpful in relieving pain from a stuck gallbladder. Bone remedies have white flowers or roots. This is an example of black cohosh, and look how the flower stalk looks like a spine. It's got white flowers, and also the form looks like a spine. And actually, research has shown that it supports bone density in postmenopause due to its phytoestrogen content. It stimulates bone nodule formation at the osteoblasts through an estrogen receptor mechanism. But there are other bone healing plants as well, like comfrey root. If you've ever dug up comfrey root, you know that the outer part of comfrey root is black, but as soon as you cut it open, the inside is chalk white. And another name for comfrey is knit bone. The genus is Symphytum, which is from the base, the Latin base, symphio, which means to knit together. And comfrey helps knit broken bones together. It was often used as a poultice. The leaves and the roots were pounded together, and then it was put on a broken bone as a plaster, and it helped the stimulation of bone creation so that broken bone would heal. But other examples are Solomon's seal, which I'll talk about in just a moment, and bone set. These are all plants that have either white flowers or white roots or both. I don't have a slide for green, but green is a color signature for vitality and nutrients, and examples of this are nettle or spinach. Think of Popeye. So green is rich in nutrients, and it tends to be a tonic for growth and strength. Now we're going to move from color into form and shape. Resemblance is perhaps the most famous and reliable aspect of the doctrine. The old teaching at the core of the Doctrine of Signatures was that the resemblance of a plant to a human organ indicated a medicinal relationship. And here we have an example of a vine. So vine growth indicates the nervous system. It indicates the nerves in the body, and passion flower and hops are the perfect examples of this, both of them being nerve relaxants and also vines. Passion flower, with its spiraling tendrils, like a web of nerves representing tangled thoughts. And I mention that because doesn't it look like that? Passion flower is used to calm the mind and calm the nervous system. It's got layers of filaments, coronas, and radial symmetry that mirror an overstimulated mind longing for harmony. It teaches the nervous system to move from chaos to calm. Don't we all need that right now? One of my favorite signatures, Angelica. Look at how remarkable the umbel flowers of Angelica look like the alveoli of the lungs. Isn't that phenomenal? And in fact, Angelica is an expectorant and anti-inflammatory for coughs, bronchitis, and respiratory infections. Interestingly, Angelica also has a hollow stem, and hollow stems, both in Angelica as well as in onion and garlic, indicate the bronchial tubes. And all of those plants, like onion with quercetin and garlic with allicin, are anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial for lung issues. What's fascinating too is the lung tissue and the connection that we have with the plant world, and it's that microcosm and macrocosm, as above, so below, and how our lungs actually look like an upside down tree. The bronchial tubes look like a tree, and then the lungs actually look like the foliage of a tree. Mullein. Large leaves represent the skin and the lungs. So plants require transpiration, which is moisture or water is absorbed through the root of a plant, and then they give off excess water vapor through their leaves. So we do the same thing with perspiration through our skin and respiration through our lungs. So plants that have large leaves, like mullein or coltsfoot or elecampane, are indicators for the lung and the skin. And I brought a mullein leaf so you can see. A lot easier to see in person how big a mullein leaf actually is. What's interesting too is leaves that have fine hairs on them are also an indication for the lungs. Examples of this are coltsfoot and mullein. So our lungs are the mucosal lining of our lungs is covered with a downy velvet. It increases the surface area of the lungs for respiration. So herbs that have, that downy hair on them are an indication for the lungs. So mullein has two. Has the texture, it also has the size, indicating it for the lungs, and in fact is incredibly demulcent and expectorant for pulmonary problems, and it's the leaves that are used. The flowers are used as well as an anti-inflammatory topically, The leaves are used in tea or tincture. What's fascinating about the human lungs is that there is massively large surface area in our lungs, approximately 70 to 80 meters, about the size of a tennis court. And that maximizes gas exchange. So Mullen mirrors that, as you can see. Flowers with tufts indicate nerve endings. So St. John's wort, with its yellow blossoms blooming around the summer solstice, has long been used for centuries to bring light into the soul and improve the mood. And also, as you can see, I did a close-up of the leaves, and it's that, remember when I talked to you about the, William Cole's talking about the tiny oil glands in the leaves are an indication of St. John's wort for skin ailments. And in fact, it is. St. John's wort promotes wound healing and is used topically to reduce inflammation and soothe skin irritations. But as you can see, the flowers themselves, and now research has shown how effective it is for depression and for mood elevation. But the little tufts of flowers indicating the nerve endings. Can't have a plant talk without nettle. So herbs with thorns or prickles indicate their helpfulness in uses in pain. So when you think about plants like prickly ash or hawthorn or aurelia, these are plants with thorns, and they're all good for pain. For example, aurelia is very effective for arthritic pain. But stinging nettle has hairs that resemble fine needles, as you can see in the close-up of the stem. And this indicates it for stinging conditions like insect bites or allergic reactions on the skin or rheumatism. It was traditionally used for rheumatic conditions by actually slapping it on the skin. And the formic acid in the needles would go into the skin and actually reduce pain and inflammation. Also, the hairs resemble human hair. And nettle is used in German medicine to improve scalp circulation and stem hair loss. The wonders continue. Skullcap. Skullcap. So it has flowers that look like little medieval helmets. I don't know if you can see that in the picture, but it indicates skullcap as a plant for the head and the brain. And skullcap is used for anxiety, stress, insomnia, muscular tension, and nervous exhaustion. It's got the antispasmodic blue color signature, as you'll see, and is a tropho-restorative. It rebuilds the nervous system, reducing anxiety, improving the mood by stimulating GABA production, which is a neurotransmitter that calms the nerves. So little helmet-like head shapes. Skullcap is another favorite. Plants that look like the mouth and throat, as you can imagine, are anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, and astringent for throat and mouth conditions, so often used for tonsillitis or sore throats as a gargle. Self-heal contains flavonoids, phenolic acids, tannins, and polysaccharides, all soothing for an irritated and inflamed throat. And you'll see this growing abundantly everywhere around. So if you have a sore throat, make a gargle out of the tea. Plants that have a rhythmic and symmetrical alignment indicate tendons and bones. And here we have Solomon seal. Perfect example. The roots look like vertebra, knuckles, or joints, and then with the leaves attaching like muscle attaches to the bone. It's often called herbal osteopath because it supports and repairs connective tissue like tendons, joints, and ligaments. It's used for sprains and strains, arthritis, and restoring proper tension to ligaments, whether ligaments are too loose or too tight. It restores proper tension. It also aids in the knitting of bones. And remember, the white flowers indicate bones as well. So it's got a color and a form signature. Violet is probably the most prominent indication for the heart. I brought some violet leaves here so you could see. As you can see, the leaf looks like a heart. It's got distinctive heart-shaped leaves. Violet has also often been called heart's ease. So those are synonyms, and has been associated for centuries with emotional comfort and easing of a broken heart. As a tea, I would recommend that. Modern studies support violet's antihypertensive and antilipidemic actions. So do you know what I mean by, questions are supposed to be after, that's okay. But just make a note of it. I'll get to it after. I don't want to use these terms that you don't understand, but hyperlipidemic means, if your blood lipids are out of balance, like HDLs, LDLs. So violet is good for balancing blood lipids. And then antihypertensive is as a blood pressure remedy. So both connected to the heart. So as you can see, modern research is proving what the doctrine of signatures has known for centuries. And here we have milk thistle. The white veins indicating milk thistle as a galactagogue, which is increasing milk production in nursing women. Silymarin's estrogen-mimicking properties stimulate prolactin, which increases milk production in lactating moms. Isn't that amazing? It's like the milk veins in the breast. And lastly, we have the classic signature of the Doctrine of Signatures, eyebright. The white petals like the sclera of the eye, pale purple veins like the iris, and the yellow spot like the pupil. Eyebright is anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, and astringent, and is used for conjunctivitis or blepharitis. It's very effective for someone who has pink eye, for example, as an eye wash. It's excellent if someone's got like itchy eyes from allergies. It's very, very soothing and anti-inflammatory to the eyes. It has high levels of quercetin that inhibits histamine production, so it's excellent for allergies, especially if someone's got, their eyes are affected by allergies. The rest of the signatures rely on senses other than sight, so slides would not really be relevant, but let's talk a little bit about those. So let's talk about our tactile sense. The feel of a plant often mirrors its actions. And as I mentioned, mullein. Here we go with mullein again. So it's soft, it's soft and comfy. And the soft, velvety leaves indicate mullein as an anti-inflammatory. And it does soothe inflamed tissues. It contains flavonoids, saponins, and verbascicide, which research has shown that reduces joint swelling. I had a client who came to me with severe joint pain from an injury that he had had decades before. And I was walking through my garden trying to figure out what plant would be exactly right for him. And I had a mullein plant, and it was like bent. So the stem wasn't broken, but normally mullein stands very tall. It's about, stands probably about 6 feet tall. And this one was going like that and growing that way. And I thought, that's the plant that he needs, because he was dealing with a prior injury. And so I used that as a confirmation from what I already was feeling, that mullein was anti-inflammatory for his joints, but then that particular plant was showing me its signature specifically for him. Plants with like smooth or slippery, like aloe or slippery elm or marshmallow, that have mucilaginous properties indicate they're healing for coating and healing the mucosal lining of the digestive tract. So slippery, again, that texture. And then taste. So our tongues are actually remarkable diagnostic tools, and plants that taste bitter are an indication for plants that are good for detoxification or for the liver. They also stimulate digestion. Dandelion is a great example of this, but gentian, chamomile, and yarrow also. The taste of sweet indicates carbohydrates or mucilage, which actually helps balance blood sugar. So isn't that interesting that a plant that's sweet actually helps balance blood sugar? Great example of this is gymnema or fenugreek or licorice are all examples of this. Sour indicates acids and astringent tannins that help tighten tissues and reduce swelling, particularly in the kidney or urinary tract. And indications, plants for this are rose hips or hawthorn, hibiscus, and lemon balm. So, yeah. Pungent or spicy flavors indicate a stimulation to the circulatory system, which is no surprise. Or also carminatives, plants that help expel gas in the digestive tract. And examples of this are cayenne, ginger, and garlic, which have a pungent or spicy and either increase circulation or improve digestion. And lastly, salty. The flavor of salty indicates mineral-rich or moistening plants like seaweed or dandelion leaf or chickweed as examples of this. And lastly, a sense of smell. In ancient Greece and Rome, it was believed that plants with high volatile oils would expel or dispel evil spirits. So plants with high volatile oils like cinnamon, clove, and frankincense were used as fumigants. And even today, plants with high levels of essential oils are used as antiseptics, like thyme, for example. And then lastly, the scent of resins. So when you think of the scent of pine resin, for example, and how pine resin is actually sticky, and that stickiness helps heal skin lesions and wounds. So sticky and sticky, so that texture. But also, I don't know if you're familiar with grindelia. It's a plant that grows easily and abundantly here. The flowers have a sticky resin, and it's probably the most effective remedy for poison oak. You know how the poison oak blisters are kind of oozy? Grindelia resin, it's again that sticky and sticky. The other plant that I love that grows abundantly in this area is yerba santa, and the leaves have a sticky resin on them as well. And the sticky resin, I also connect that with anti-catarrhal plants or plants that help reduce mucus in the lungs. Because think of how mucus just gets stuck there when we get a cough and just we cough and cough and cough. So plants with resins like yerba santa are going to be good for help loosening up that congestion. I had a client that came to me who had been dealing with postpartum depression for a couple of years and had this chronic cough. And I immediately knew yerba santa was the right plant for her, because not only is it good for loosening up mucus and expelling mucus from the lungs, but it also, as a flower essence, is used for relieving grief and sadness, especially when it's really felt in the heart or in the lungs. So yerba santa, she was within a week, she was completely better. But a lot of that was releasing the grief she was holding. And again, that goes back to what I was talking about regarding Paracelsus, how he was talking about disease being a disharmony with universal forces. So we have a disharmony in our energy because there's stuck grief or blockage. You know, it's important to look at that, not just the symptom picture of what's going on. There's sound and timing, too, that I wanted to mention. So when you imagine like wind blowing through a pine tree and how soothing that is for the nerves, and then pine essential oil or the pine scent is actually calming for the nervous system, so a correlation there. This is not necessarily relevant today as much as it used to be, but there's so many different remedies that are spoken of in old school times about snake bite. There must have been a lot of snake bites, because a lot of old herbals talk about plants for snake bites. But one of the most interesting auditory references is wild indigo. The seeds rattling in their pods sound like a
Rattlesnake.
Thank you. Sound like a rattlesnake, and it's indicated for snake bites. The other one is, if we went back to the nettle slide, it's when a plant thrives or blooms is also an indication of what it can be beneficial for. And nettle is a perfect example of that. It thrives in the springtime, right when springtime allergies are at their peak. And it's one of our best medicines for relieving allergies. So I would be remiss in not mentioning flower essence therapy in this discussion because it's one of the modern practices where the doctrine of signatures is alive and well. Flower essence practitioners look at shape, color, habitat, and the gesture of a flower to determine how the plant might be beneficial for more of a spiritual or soul or energetic application. For example, sunflower, with its tall, radiant, sun-following gesture, is used and suggested for self-confidence. Or bleeding heart, with its drooping heart-shaped flowers, points to grief, loss, and releasing unhealthy attachments. And then dandelion, thriving through cracks in the pavement, indicates resilience, adaptability, and breaking through constraints. Where clinical herbalism might apply the doctrine of signatures to organs, flower essence therapy applies it to psyche, soul, and subtle energy. And because flower essences are homeopathic, there's no concern about toxicity. The two plants in this slide are worthy of mention. Cleavers, which I'm sure you all have experienced when you've been out walking, even in Lithia Park, get stuck to your plant legs. It's sometimes called herbal Velcro. It's got hooked Velcro-like hairs that cling to everything. And it's one of the best anti-catarrhals, so I used that action earlier. Anti-catarrhal is a plant that helps thin out mucus and get it moving through the body. Cleavers is one of the best plants for that. Think of it clinging to the mucus and moving it through the body. And then horsetail. Look at how the stems look like joints. And as I mentioned earlier, it's got silica that supports connective tissue and acts as an anti-inflammatory for the musculoskeletal system. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a reciprocity with the plant world. We exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide. This is an undeniable and automatic bond that we have with the plant world. It's remarkable, like I said earlier, how our bronchial tubes look like an upside down tree and our lungs look like the foliage of the tree. Recognizing this connection with the plant world enables us to shift our attitude to one of deep appreciation and respect, which are the key elements to a good relationship. The doctrine of signatures is a practice for us to slow down, observe, and enter into dialogue with plants. It's a way to reawaken wonder, strengthen our memory, and build relationships with the green world. We deepen our relationships with plants by opening up and engaging with our senses, starting with observation, then paying attention to the feeling sensation we receive from the plant. This is a state of being, not doing, and a process of noticing the emotional response within that the plant sends us. So the next time you're out in nature, I suggest that you sit down, take a few deep breaths, connect with a tree or a plant nearby, close your eyes, and notice what you feel inside. What are the body sensations that you receive? Because the plants do communicate with us in this way. Let's talk a little bit about limitations. Not every plant has an obvious signature, and not every signature is safe to follow. Some plants are toxic despite suggestive experiences. For example, hemlock. Hemlock grows in wet environments, as does wild carrot or Queen Anne's lace. Queen Anne's lace is actually, that healthy wet environment shows that it's good for kidney stones, but hemlock is not. So you can't always rely on a signature, and including the habitat, to indicate the benefit of a plant. I don't know if you know this, but hemlock is famous for Socrates' death. Today, science helps us understand constituents, safety, and dosage, but still the doctrine remains a poetic, intuitive, and deeply relational way of knowing plants. In my work as an herbalist, the doctrine of signatures is an effective way of confirming or backing up what I'm already sensing might be helpful for a client. And it's also a great memory tool. If I can't remember what a plant does, I can just look at it and say, oh, that's right. I know exactly what it's for. I'm going to close with another Ben Charles Harris quote. Remember that there are useful plants which do not have a signature, and that not every signature is applicable in every case. However, I believe that every plant, every tree, every blade of grass has some virtue, perhaps still undiscovered, and the signature theory in general has proven to be a most effective way of teaching and learning about the plants that we know. Thank you. I have, we're going to do Q&A, but I have an email sign-up sheet over there as well as a flyer about a class I'm teaching in October if you're interested. You had a question?
Well, the email sign up is, do you send out little
You send out junk
words?
mail or?
No, I only send out if I have a workshop coming out.
Oh, you just send out,
Yeah.
so you don't send out little herbal notes?
Well, I put little herbal notes on my website.
Oh, what's your website?
It's amarabotanica.com.
Okay.
Oh.
I have free recipes.
A blog, an herbal blog?
I didn't quite understand that.
Oh.
Not understanding. your
Oh, I
question.
thought you were asking her maybe a good idea would be an herbal blog.
I have it on my website.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh,
Is
there
it-
you go.
Blog or blog?
God.
Okay,
They don't get
so-
any better.
So going to your website, there are notes on different plants.
There are, yes.
Okay, great. thank you.
Continuing to build it as well.
Do you have a practice here in Ashland?
I
or
do.
Can you tell us about that?
I do, yeah. I had a clinical practice in Encinitas for 20 years, and then we moved to Ashland and I opened an herb store, which I had for 16 years, and now I'm back to a clinical practice. I have my own apothecary, by the way. Now that we don't have an apothecary in town, I do have an apothecary with both teas and tinctures
in your practice or in the store?
in my practice.
Oh, cool.
I might open a store again at some point, we'll see.
Good help.
Thank you.
So with the violet,
Yeah.
do you use just the flower and the leaves?
Flower and leaf.
Okay, and you can use the plant right from the garden in a tea?
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Jane, thank you for a fabulous presentation. That was very interesting. I loved it.
Thank you.
So the plants that you use in your practice, are those all ones that you grow, or do you source them from someplace else? Or
Every single plant that I use in my practice is either one that I've grown or has been grown locally.
uh-huh.
Wow.
Do you know of any places to get good quality herbs that are available for using, if we haven't been able to grow?
Yeah, do you know, I don't know if you know, off of Eagle Mill Road, where the You Pick Flower, Melanie's place is, there's an herb garden there. Kendra is the owner, and she'll pick plants for you, or she'll meet you there and you can pick plants. It's a beautiful herb garden. Yeah, and there's also up in Williams, there's Oshala, and there's other farms as well.
So, and just one last thing, in your practice, when people come, they basically tell you what they're dealing with, and then you use a herbal remedy for them.
Correct.
Okay. Nice.
Correct.
And it,
What I do now too, which is unique to what I used to do, is I use flower essences in my formulas, because I learned through the many years of practicing that not working with the plant spirit, you're not going to get complete spiritual healing. That's a whole nother topic, but plants have active constituents that work on body systems, yes, and effectively. But there's a more holistic picture of actually working with the spirit of the plant to bring complete spiritual healing, because as we learned from Paracelsus, the basis of illness is based usually in either emotional or spiritual.
Go ahead.
oh, I just wanted to say to Shady that there's also a booth at the farmer's market. Giovanna, she's not always there, but she has so many perennial healing herbs to sell. She was there today, but she said she wouldn't be there next week.
Are you talking about from Cave Junction? Unfurl?
Is that her name?
Yeah,
Is that
yeah.
the name of her?
Yes, yeah, she has plant starts, medicinal plant starts.
And
Yeah,
do you know where she lives?
Cave Junction.
Cave Junction.
Yeah.
Oh.
In the first part of your talk, the men that you're showing in their publications, I've seen Culpeppers, but in general, did any of them get on topics of interacting with women herbalists or in Asian herbalists or things at that time period? Because it was pretty early on, and I guess people weren't getting on the bullet train. They didn't mention that at all? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, no, not that I know of. If you find out, I would love to know.
Yeah. I would say that's where the Doctrine of Signatures is the richest, really, is a lot through Asia and South America. It's like lively, in daily use there even today, so.
Right, true.
But, you know,
Yeah.
just curious at
I'd love to hear
that.
more of
Yeah.
what you've learned about that.
So they didn't mention anything like that, huh?
Not that I've read, but
Because,
I haven't.
you know, like, the women herbalists all over Europe at that time were like at the top of their game as far as like working with herbs. It's just curious. I haven't read all those books.
Truth.
Good, okay, thank
And
you.
one wonders how much knowledge was lost with 1 million people from those years.
Absolutely, yeah. And, you know, I mean, in indigenous cultures, I mean, so much rich tradition, so much of our Western herbalism is based on what we learned from Native Americans. I mean, just so much.
And aren't they still finding plants every day? Like finding new plants every day, like deep in the Amazon jungle, and that was a question. Are they still finding?
Yes, it's
new
incredible.
plants
I mean, when I first started practicing, I got my license with the American Herbalist Guild in 1992, and since then, there are so many more plants that have been discovered or have been used for the millennia, but we didn't know about them in this country, or they hadn't been researched, or, you know, the internet brought such a global awareness to the plant world. Yeah, I mean, at the time when I first started practicing, Chinese medicine was prevalent here in the U.S., but Ayurveda wasn't. So all of those plants that had been used in India, we didn't start learning about those here until the 1990s.
Just a caution, I would hesitate to say we learned. I mean, I know traditionalists now that carry lineage of thousands of years of teachings that's been uninterrupted
Yeah.
as far as plants and stuff, and Chiricahua traditions and down in South America and here on this area where we live. Yeah, so the knowledge is still there. It's not lost.
Yes.
It just isn't shared as much.
Yes, true. Good point. I was fortunate enough to study with an Apache medicine woman in the 80s, which was just, you know, I learned so much from her. So gratitude to her and all the indigenous healers.
I was just thinking about how, you know, the first really exposure that I had to herbs and herbalism was in I guess it must have been early 70s. There was a book, I think it was like Back to Eden or something.
Yeah, Jethro Kloss.
Yes.
Yes.
But like, there was one thing in there, I mean, I was really, really struggling with a physical condition that was extreme. And I learned something in there, and it was almost an immediate healing. And so it just gave me a tremendous respect for herbs and herbal medicine. And there's been times where I've really wanted to, you know, to study and learn a lot more, but it came off as kind of complicated in a sense, whereas the approach that you've laid out today, it makes it so much more approachable.
Oh, good.
Because, you know, you can engage your vision, your senses, your, you know, feeling, your intuition. And obviously, you're not just going to go try something and see if it works. You know, like mentioned with Queen Anne's lace and how much it looks like, you know, so yeah, you have to kind of get confirmation and things like that. But just, it strikes me like that with this whole approach, it's almost like it's all been laid out for us in such a beautiful way, that we just need to embrace it and just enjoy that relationship. And so thank you so much for that. And I was just curious, like, where did you hear about the signature of plants in the first place? What was your journey? How did you step into this knowledge?
The first time I heard about the Doctrine of Signatures was from an herb teacher that I had in the early 90s. She had lived at Findhorn in Scotland for a long time, and she knew about flower essences and plant signatures from her life at Findhorn. So whenever she was teaching, she always talked about the signature of plants, which was, I got that indoctrination, you know, from the beginning in my herbal practice, which was incredibly helpful.
Who was it?
Amanda McQuaid Crawford.
I lived at Findhorn
About 3 years.
but I think Amanda was probably there in the 70s.
Yeah, she was there exactly, late 70s, early 80s.
Oh.
And she was there when David Hoffman was there. Did you know David Hoffman as well? They were a Findhorn romance. And Kathy's husband Carl lived there too, Pamela. Kathy's husband Carl lived at Findhorn too. You'll have something to connect about.
One last question I had is about if you have any recommendations on, you know, books that are able to be found.
Well, you know, there's this company which is amazing. This is Thrift Books. They have a lot of old texts that are out of print. So I recommend thriftbooks.com. And then this is from, I'm trying to remember where I got this. I got this a few years ago, but it's a company that reprints old texts. I mean, this was written, when did Jacob write? He wrote this in 1588, I think. So, I mean, they reprint old texts, and if I remember the name, I'll put it on the website.
Is it in the beginning of the book?
It's not. Yeah,
What
it's
is the
not.
name of the other book?
Ben Charles Harris, The Complete Herbal. Yeah, highly recommend this. It's a quick, and I'll put these up here, you can look at them. It's not in the front of the book. Oh, Forgotten Books, it is. Kathy owned a bookstore, so she knows all things books. Forgotten Books takes the utmost care to preserve the wording and images from original books. I couldn't find William Cole's book. I tried to find William Cole's book and I couldn't find it. Any other questions? Thank you so much. What a pleasure and an honor. I really appreciate it. Thank you, thank you.